Hey guys, welcome to Everyday Infertility. This is your host, Savannah Keys. So, I am super excited about this episode because it is probably the most relevant thing happening in my own infertility and IVF journey. But if you follow me on social media at Everyday Infertility, I've had people ask me questions about this. So today's topic is going to be based around how we picked our infertility clinic or fertility clinic and when and how did we know it was time to switch, and what did that process of switching fertility clinics look like? So I'm going to just jump in and share my story. And one thing that I do want to point out as we talk about this is not everyone's journey is the same. I was just talking with a girlfriend the other day who is going through her own infertility journey. And she was like, so when you got to the clinic, how long did it take, from your first appointment to your transfer? And I was like, hey, everyone's timeline is different, not only due to everyone's own diagnosis, but because at different points in the year, a fertility clinic could be more busy, less busy. There's just so many factors that go into it. So, what I will say is, don't get hung up on the timeline. I'm just going to share my own journey and experience, and hopefully, it helps you all. So, the first place I'm going to start is picking our original fertility clinic. Going back a little bit, for those who don't know, me and my husband struggled to get pregnant for a little bit over a year. We did a couple months on Clomid and timed ovulation cycles before getting an HSG. After getting an HSG, we found out that both of my fallopian tubes were blocked, which immediately led us to IVF. So, understanding that people take very different journeys leading up to IVF and other diagnoses, this is just our story. So we once we did my HSG, we met with my gynecologist. And at that appointment, he had confirmed, yes, IVF is the only option for you moving forward. And we had a ton of questions. We had like the obvious question of what is IVF? How does it work? What do our chances look like? What do we need to know? But one of the more immediate questions is, where do we start and where do you go for that? So I live in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and there's limited options in the state. So at the time, there were 4 clinics, and I believe we are down to 3. So our doctor at that time, my gynecologist, had said, like, hey, here's what I know about the clinics here in Oklahoma. Here's also clinics I'm familiar with in surrounding states like Texas, Colorado, so on and so forth. I would just suggest you start researching and then set up appointments with those that you feel you want to explore. So me and my husband went home and we discussed, after many days of crying and coping and saying, like, okay, this is the journey we're on. We sat down and we looked at these clinics. With there being 4 options in Oklahoma, we decided that the best thing for us at the time, given our work schedules and everything going on, and really it being our first round with IVF, was let's start local. So we made an appointment with each of the Oklahoma clinics, which there were 4 of them. 3 of them were Oklahoma City based, which is where I'm at, and then one of them was in Tulsa, which is about an hour and a half away. Our game plan going into this was, let's talk with the local fertility clinics. And if we don't feel comfortable moving forward with any of them, then we'll set up appointments with, maybe some clinics in Colorado or Texas or really anywhere else. That worked for us because of our work schedules, because of this being the first time. We did not feel comfortable at the time traveling out of state for something that was so new to us. And looking back, I am glad that a local clinic worked for us the first go around, because you do have so many appointments. Sometimes you have 2 a week, and these appointments are 10, 15 minutes long sometimes. So to travel for some of these appointments, especially when this process was so new to me, just wasn't something that I felt comfortable with at the time. So we researched the clinics here in Oklahoma, and I made appointments with all of them. Now, the first surprise to me was the timeline and the wait on these. I've talked a little bit about timelines before, but that is not something that you can compare at all. So I have women ask me all the time, like, well, what was your timeline from meeting with your clinic to egg retrieval or transfer? Or what was your time of this to this? Or how long did you have to wait? And that's just not something that I ever feel comfortable sharing. I do share, but with a very big asterisk of like, this is my timeline. Yours could look night and day different because of your diagnosis, because of your clinic, because of testing, because of so many different things. So, the biggest thing to me was timing of appointments. So, 2 out of the 4 clinics, I was able to set a meeting with fairly quickly. We're talking 2 to 3 weeks. One of them, we went on site and we met with the doctor. The first appointment was a ultrasound. So they did a vaginal ultrasound just to kind of like see, yes, your tubes are blocked. Is there anything else that would be of hindrance? And we sat down and we talked with him about what the process would be. Now, the first clinic I went to has been around for a very long time and has a very well known reputation within Oklahoma. We felt comfortable with the doctor from a experience standpoint. We felt comfortable with the clinic up to a certain piece. They were sharing with us that their labs were understaffed and were taking quite a bit of time, and that was a red flag to us. Another thing is that the doctor was very close to retirement age. I mean, there's no easier way to put it. And one of the conversations we had when we left is like, what if this takes us a couple months or a couple years and he retires in the middle? That's not something that we would want to start over with a new doctor at that time, given that situation. So we continued forth and met with other clinics. The second clinic we met with was brand new. I am talking, they had opened their doors like a couple months before we had got our diagnosis. Now, what made us feel comfortable with us is that they were backed by some of the original doctors that started when IVF first came out. So they had the backing and the experience that we really trusted and leaned on. Because they were new, they were taking kind of a newer approach of like, hey, infertility can be inexpensive. And when we're talking about IVF, you all who are familiar with it know you're spending thousands upon thousands of dollars, and it's not rare for a cycle to be, upwards of 20 grand. So to also save money on the first go around, not knowing if it's going to work or not, was enticing to us. We did feel extremely at ease with this doctor that we met with. So at this time, we had set 2 appointments out of the 4 fairly early. And then the other 2 appointments were 6+ months out. Now, I am not going to say I would have done things differently because we could have waited those 6 months, met with those clinics, and not been happy and wasted time. So me and my husband had to make the hard decision of, do we move forward with this one clinic that we feel comfortable with? We feel comfortable with the doctor. We feel comfortable with the clinic. We kind of had this gut feeling of like, let's take a chance on them. Or do we wait and potentially waste more time? So we made the decision to keep those appointments. So let's not cancel them. So the other remaining 2 appointments, one was in Oklahoma City, one was in Tulsa, which is about an hour and a half away. Let's keep them. Let's move forward with this fertility clinic. And if the time comes and we're not happy with our clinic, then we'll take them up on that consultation and see about switching at that point. So we started with our fertility clinic, and some of the questions that we asked and how we chose them was, one, what is the doctor's background and experience? Two, what is the overall clinic's background and experience? How do you all approach IVF in terms of, do you think that I need to take all these supplements and change my diet and change my lifestyle? How do you do egg retrievals? What do you do if it's unsuccessful? How do you approach transfers? Is it frozen? Is it fresh? Do you do genetic testing? Really just asking all of these questions. We also read reviews. Now, it was easier to read reviews on the other 3 clinics than the one that we chose originally because they were newer. So, reading reviews is important. And one of the things that is on every fertility clinic's website is what's called SART reviews, SART. And it's essentially these reports of success. So percentage of success every year. And so that is something that we were looking at as well. And then, of course, asking people you know. I am in a couple different IVF Facebook groups, and I, went there and was like, hey, for those in Oklahoma, what's your experience with this clinic? For those in Oklahoma, who have you chosen? And so a lot of those things were how we ultimately decided. But I'm not going to lie to you. What it came down to is, do we feel comfortable? What is the timeline like? How much travel is it? And can we see ourselves being successful here? So we ultimately made the decision to go with the second fertility clinic that we talked to. And I'm actually very confident in that decision still today, even after switching clinics. So we decided to go forth with that clinic. We did an egg retrieval with them, which gave us 6 genetically tested embryos. We did one frozen transfer with them, which it was a failure. It did not take. We did a second frozen transfer with them, which also was a failure and did not take. And at that point, we went back to the drawing board and said, it's time for us to do testing. So we did ERA, Emma Alice, and natural killer cell. So at this point, my fertility clinic is doing all of the things that I'm seeing others post about in Facebook groups, and the women that I'm talking about or talking with on social media and in conversation, like everything that's supposed to happen is happening. So I have no red flags. What is interesting is some of the ways that things were done. So over time, you make connections with women in, the infertility world, and you just learn, like, what's your experience? One of the things that stood out to me is that when I did my egg retrieval, I was not under anesthesia. So I was under twilight anesthesia. So I'm awake. I'm seeing it happen, which, minus the pain, it was pretty cool. It was a cool experience, but it hurt. I mean, it hurt like hell. My husband was not in the room with me, and he was like multiple rooms down and heard me screaming, crying. So that is one thing that I would have changed in my experience with my first clinic. But at the time, they just weren't doing general anesthesia for egg retrievals. When I would talk with other women of their journeys with their fertility clinics, that was standard. Another thing that kind of stood out to me is my fertility doctor was doing every ultrasound, and he was at every appointment, which I liked. I liked him being involved, but what I didn't realize is that's not always standard. For larger clinics, they either have a PA or, an ultrasound tech doing these things so the doctors can focus on the procedures, the consultations, and their clients' protocols. So over time, while everything was going how it should, we weren't having success. And I just felt like my doctor was a little too stretched thin. So we get geared up to go into our third transfer. And of course, throughout this time, we're dealing with my thyroid, and my doctor had very strong feelings on where my thyroid needed to be on a map. One thing that stood out to me in this time between our second transfer, the Emma Alice, ERA, natural killer cell testing, and the third transfer is that, my fertility doctor is saying your thyroid needs to be here. But my naturopath and, thyroid doctor is saying, like, it's okay if your thyroid's in this range. As long as it's in normal range, it shouldn't affect implantation. It shouldn't affect pregnancy. Like, you're fine. And so that was hard for me. I have one doctor who, is supposed to be this specialist in IVF that's like, no, this is what it needs to be. But I have someone who attends conventions for thyroids and talks to specialists and doctors, and like, this is what they do day in and day out, saying, no, that's wrong. So over time, there's these little things creating doubt within my mind. And, of course, the failures are the biggest red flag that you have of like, is this me? Is this the embryo? Is this the clinic? Like, why is this not working? And so throughout this time, I'm telling my husband, like, let's give this clinic one more transfer. And if it doesn't work, I would like to look at additional options and just get a second opinion. Um, I am a big believer in getting second opinions because if you're doing everything that you can and you're happy, great. If you're not doing everything you can and you aren't happy, like it is time to make a change. So we go into my third transfer. And at this point in time, I'm super excited. I'm like, this is the time. It's going to work. Like everything's lining up. It's going to be so perfect. And my fertility doctor cancels my transfer at my mid-cycle appointment. So about 2 weeks out from my transfer, he's like, nope, sorry. Probably not even 2 weeks out, probably 7 to 10 days. He's like, nope, sorry, we're canceling it. Your thyroid's, too high. For those of you that are familiar with thyroid levels, my TSH at the time was like 3, right at 3. And my fertility doctor, throughout the whole time I was with them, he wanted it under 2.5. Well, it was under 2.5 when we started at my baseline appointment, and it had risen. And by this time, we had had enough patterns and data to show that my increased estrogen from the medicine was causing my TSH to rise. And so I'm like, please don't cancel it. Let me follow up with my thyroid doctor to see like what she thinks. So I follow up with my thyroid doctor, and she's like, look, if your thyroid is in normal range, which is zero point 0.4 to 4.5, you are good. Do not cancel your cycle. You've spent all this money on medicine. You spent time. Like, do this. You're fine. And also, we can just adjust your medicine because if your estrogen is higher, let me just adjust it. You're fine. Continue. So I take that back to my fertility doctor, and he's like, no, I don't feel comfortable with it. You can take this chance, but I highly advise against it. And I think we should cancel it. So at that point, of course, I'm devastated. You're so excited. You feel so close to a chance. You've spent all this money. You've wasted all this medicine. You've been injecting yourselves for weeks. You have bruises on your body. You feel like crap. And you're like, so we're canceling it? So at that point, there were clear concerns that I had. One, I felt like my clinic at the time was just not using the most state of the art technology, and that's specifically talking about how the egg retrieval was done. Two, I felt like my doctor was pretty stretched thin. Three, I have one person who specializes in thyroid saying one thing, and I have a doctor saying the other. I'm getting conflicting information on Google. I'm getting conflicting information from other women in similar situations on IVF Facebook groups and people that I'm talking to. And the last thing is, I started at this point talking to other women that were going to my same clinic. And it seemed as if they were all having similar concerns. And one common thing that kept coming up was that the doctor that I was seeing, while the clinic was being ran at the top by a certified or board certified reproductive endocrinologist, my IVF doctor was not a board certified reproductive endocrinologist. Now, we knew that going into it. I guess I just did not realize how much weight that carried in terms of experience. And so that is something that just over those last couple weeks just kept creeping into my head and creating doubt and making me wonder. Sorry, I had to get a drink for those of you not on video. So, anyways, at that point in time, our third round is canceled. And I told my husband, like, look, I feel at this point that I need to get a second opinion. We'll rewind. I had mentioned that we kept the remaining 2 appointments, and we said that we would go forth and continue to talk with them if we started with this new clinic and we weren't happy. Well, the time came for those 2 other consults to happen, and we were happy with our clinic, so we canceled them. So at this point, I feel like I am just back at square one, despite having doing, all of these transfers and testing and, all the history that we've built up with this clinic. So we go back and we're like, okay, what clinics do we want to get a second opinion from? We have the 2 other clinics here in Oklahoma that we originally were going to meet with. at this time, we feel like we've been through IVF a couple times to where we do feel confident that we could travel out of state for some of these appointments. While it's not preferred, we don't want to, there's so much that goes into it. It's more time off work. It's finding someone to watch your animals while you're gone. It's like for those smaller appointments like baseline and mid-cycle, like does my husband also take off work and go with me? Do I go alone? Like there's just so much that goes into traveling that you don't think about if you're new to this. If you've been through it a couple of times, you're like, okay, maybe it's doable because I know all of the things I have to do and all of the things I have to consider. Now, could we have went out of state and traveled? Absolutely. Would it have probably caused a little bit more stress for both of us? Absolutely. But, we were willing to take that. That was a no-brainer. It's like, a little bit more stress for the chance at a baby, we would have done that. But throughout this time of me having these concerns and thinking like, okay, if our third transfer doesn't work, I want to get a second opinion. I started this research over again. And having gone through this and having, built up this knowledge to this point, I was really digging deeper into the websites and deeper into the SART data around success. And I was really talking with people and asking people proactively, reactively, asking in Facebook groups, joining Facebook groups of the fertility clinics. A lot of fertility clinics have their own Facebook groups. So I am like doing extensive research, probably triple the amount of research that I did in the first place. And I felt very confident of scheduling a consultation with one of the clinics in Oklahoma that is out of Tulsa. So if you all remember, I live in Oklahoma City. Tulsa is about 90 miles away. It's like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. And I was like, okay, we're still traveling, but we're not quite going out of state. But I feel very confident in taking this second opinion consultation with this clinic. So I go in, I do a virtual consultation, and I just fall in love with my doctor. I am telling you guys, I had great vibes with our original doctor. I really liked him, and I don't regret that. I think that is the biggest thing that people think when you switch a fertility clinic, you've had such a horrible experience. I didn't. I had a great experience, and I'm thankful for everyone that was there that helped me not only get our 6 original embryos, but we learned so much. With every failure, I walked away learning something. Our first failure, maybe we didn't learn something significant, but then doing the same exact protocol for, transfer 2, then we were like, okay, it wasn't it wasn't maybe me or the embryo. Can we switch up the protocol? Can we do more testing? Can we do this? Then we did a round of testing and we learned that I didn't have any good or bad bacteria within my uterus. And so it was essentially a sterile environment. That's a quick, easy fix. We did all of this other testing that ruled stuff out. Throughout all of this, throughout the three cycles, 2 transfers and one failed transfer or one failed cycle, canceled cycle, we learned that increased estrogen increases my TSH and my thyroid. So I am thankful and grateful for the experience that I had. But you do have to be so selfish in this, in the fact that you're trying to get to your baby. You are trying to get pregnant despite all of the odds against you. You're spending so much money. You have to be selfless. Selfless. You do have to be selfless. You have to be selfish and ruthless in making this decision. It's your money. It's your body. It's your future babies. And I did deal with like the guilt of like, what if I hurt their feelings? What if they think that they failed me? What if, what if? And finally I was like, screw it. I have to do what's best for me. And I just have to tell them like, hey guys, this isn't working anymore. I've taken another consultation with another clinic and I'm thinking about moving. What does the process look like to move my embryos? So back to my consultation with this new clinic. I met with the doctor and I did click with him. I had that immediate calm feeling that I had with our first clinic, but this doctor came with just so much more experience. He had been doing this for 25 years. He was a board certified reproductive endocrinologist. He also had done some time doing a lot of like immunology studies. I just truly was like, okay, the experience is there. And that's what I felt it was kind of lacking at our first clinic. The second thing is I told him all of my history with my thyroid. I even gave him like all of my labs over the year that we did IVF the first round. And he was like, look, if your thyroid's in normal range, we can move forward. It's such old school data that is only backed by fertility doctors that your thyroid needs to be below a 2.5. And he's like, we've done studies on it. I've delivered thousands of babies. I've done all of these things. And I have never seen if it's within normal range or below 2.5 that there's a difference. You can still have a successful transfer. You can still have a successful pregnancy. We do want to monitor it extremely close given your thyroid diagnosis. But like, I don't think that you should have put your IVF journey on pause for 8 months. I don't think that you should have canceled your third transfer. Like, I would have gone forward and done this. And that is just something, because of the data and the facts and the stories he shared with me, I felt so comfortable moving forward with him. The last reason that kind of shifted my mindset is he was like, at a certain point in time, when you have had failed transfers and we have done this much testing, we not that we don't continue to look at the mom and the dad or the parents, but at some point we look at the embryos. And so he's like, what are the grades of your embryos? And I was like, oh, I don't know, like, let me ask my clinic. And he was like, you should know that. Why don't you have that information? And I was like, oh, my clinic didn't share it with me. They just tell me the grades on the day of transfers. So there was things that he was concerned with. That was one of them. And I wouldn't call the next one a concern, but he was like, we've done all this testing. At some point you have to look at the embryos and see, even though they're genetically tested and they're genetically normal, like, what's the grades of them? Like, are they working? Do we need to, dive deeper? The next thing is he was like, what do you think about putting 2 in? If you want to have a baby and you want, to kind of have a baby as soon as possible, let's double our chances. So that was something that he was open to that my first clinic wasn't open to at all. So all of these things at this consult, I am just like, okay, I feel like this is the right decision for us. And I'm starting to understand moving clinics, while it is a lot and there is so much to do, it's not that scary. Of course, I did additional research on like, what is the cost difference? What is traveling going to look like? Now, the clinic I was going to was in Tulsa, but I would travel out of state for my transfers. So that is something that we had to take into consideration of like, okay, we aren't traveling the whole process, which is great and works for us, but we are going to travel at some point. So looking at the cost differentiators, looking at the travel, and then looking at what is the time frame to move all of our embryos over. So I go back to our previous clinic, and I'm going to be honest, guys, like I said, I had a great experience with them. It was hard to tell them I was leaving, especially because I truly, truly, truly loved my IVF coordinator. I mean, I was just like sweating and like shaking, sending her this email. And she responded, and it was the nicest email of like, you absolutely have to do what's best for you. Like, no, we don't even feel any type of way. We wish you the best. We're here to help. Let us know what you need. And so leaving couldn't have went better. And I do feel like we just left on such a good positive note. So at that point, I'm working with this new clinic and we are switching our embryos over. That is something I wish I had done a little bit more research on, because I don't know what I thought going into it. I kind of thought the 2 clinics would work it out between themselves, but there is a third-party element to it. So we did have to hire a third-party embryo transport service. Now, I say I wish I would have done more research. There's not much out there in terms of embryo transport companies. There's a handful in the industry, but all of their websites are the same. There's not really differentiators if you're just looking at a website. So I called a couple, had a few conversations, but ultimately we just went with one of the companies that was on both my previous clinic and my new clinic's recommendation list, and that was CryoStork. So it was a fairly straightforward and easy process. I filled out a form on their website for a quote of what I'm looking to transport from where to where. And they immediately sent me an email and said, like, here's what the quote is. Now it was ranging anywhere from like, I think it was like $800 to like $2,000. And there were a lot of different things that went into that, such as insurance, monitoring, so on and so forth. You know, how far is it going? Are you putting it on the next flight out? Stuff like that. So I got the transport company ready to go, and then I waited on my new clinic to give me a date that worked for them to receive the embryos, and my previous clinic to let me know when we could pick them up. So there is a little bit of management that has to be done on like all three parties. Like, is everyone working well together? Do we have our timelines working out? You know, is this something that's going to be like a seamless process? Now, we of course were extremely nervous to put our embryos on a plane and send them to a different state, especially because you're not there. And so we did the highest package that they had to offer with the insurance. So if anything happened, you know, it would cover a new cycle for us to get embryos. And throughout the days that they were moving from one place to another, I was a complete nervous wreck. I mean, we're talking about one, your genetic children, your embryos, your chance at having a baby, but I'm looking at that as like that was $25,000. Not the transfer of, you know, embryo from state to state, but like going through the egg retrieval process, creating the embryos, getting them tested, like that was 25 grand right there. I want to make sure that my 25 grand and my future children, like this goes down perfectly, not one hiccup. The only thing, and this is completely my fault, is when I was reading what was included in the embryo transport package, I read 24/7 monitoring. And so, in my mind, because this is just me and I jump to conclusions and I assume, I am thinking I'm going to get like this tracking number and I'm going to be able to track and see my little embryo babies and like where they're at, you know, where they're, you know, when they're going to be somewhere, timestamp, all of this stuff. I should have read closer or I should have asked because that's not the case. It was monitoring for the company. So, you know, once we get the previous clinic say, hey, you could pick them up on this date, that aligns with the new clinic when they can receive them, flight schedules, all of that. There were some things I didn't realize how it would work. So I'm here to tell you guys. The transport company will go to your previous clinic and they will pick up the embryos in a cryo tank. They will then take that to the airport, give that to a airport worker, and then that airport worker takes it through security, you know, and basically loads it on a plane. That plane then departs, and if the plane does not make it before your clinic closes, that cryo tank just sits at the airport overnight. Not something I thought about. I'm thinking, you know, they're going to be there first thing in the morning to pick it up. They're going to get on the next flight. They're going to be there within a couple hours. Not exactly how it happened. There's so much logistics that happens on the back end. Like, of course, that's not how that would work. You know, that would be a perfect scenario, but not everything works that way. So we had our embryos picked up midday from our previous clinic, then transported to the airport. By the time they went through and got on the plane, they made it to the new clinic's state after they closed. So I think the flight landed at like 6 p.m. So that's not something I knew about going into it. And I don't know that it would have changed anything moving forward. It's just how the logistics worked out. But our embryos did sit at the airport overnight. And then first thing in the morning, someone from the company went and picked it up from the airport and then took it to the new clinic where they, you know, of course, took ownership of them. I say ownership. That's weird. They took them and put them in their lab. So anyways, it was definitely not the process that I thought, but looking back on it, I just should have asked more questions because it makes sense. And let me say, we had a great experience with CryoStork. They were quick to email and respond. They sent updates when a flight took off, when a flight landed, when it was going to be, ETAs. Like, we had a really, really, really great experience with them. And I would recommend them. I thought for the price, it was great. And my embryos made it. So, what can I say? But anyways, so our new embryos made it to our new clinic. And at this point, we're kind of off to the races. So, similar process at our new clinic. We go through baseline appointments to see if we're ready to start a cycle with them. And, I haven't fully embarked on my first cycle with them. I just had my baseline appointment this week. So we'll get the okay to start medicine. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll really kick this cycle off. What I will say to everyone is you have to trust your gut. I can sit here and tell you my story and why we went with one clinic and how we made the decision to switch and what that looked like. But like I said, you all have to be selfish. You have to make this decision for what's best for you, what's best for your partner, what's best for your future babies, what's best for you financially, what's best for you in a timeline, what's best for you, travel wise. There's so many things that go into this. And you have to listen to your gut and you have to pay attention to the red flags or the concerns. You also have to educate yourself. I have learned so much throughout this process. And I don't fault myself. I think multiple times throughout this episode, I said, like, oh, second time around, I researched more. The next time around, I just knew more. I can't fault myself. I didn't know what I didn't know. And this is such an intricate, complex process. Infertility is no matter what stage you're in. And so I'm grateful for my experience. Do I wish my first transfer worked? Yes. Do I wish my second transfer worked? Yes. But I've learned so much along the ways that you have to remember to be grateful for the little things. If I was just upset with the process from start to finish, I'm not growing. I'm not getting better as a person. And, for what I'm doing, I can't share and be a resource to others within the infertility and IVF world. So, as hard as some of this has been, when we look at it as a learning lesson, I've also taken so much out of it. So, that is my story start to finish of how we selected a original clinic. What were some of the signs and thoughts that made us think, do we need a second opinion? What did that look like? And then how did we transfer? I am sure this looks a million different ways for a million different people, but hopefully sharing some of these details and insights is helpful to someone else, because I didn't have anyone to talk to or ask what switching clinics looked like. And I should have asked more people, but again, you don't know what you know. So all of that to say, I'm so grateful that all of you are here, and I hope this episode is helpful to you or a loved one in your life. If you have any questions for me, if you want to reach out and just say, hey, if you want to reach out and suggest a topic, these are things that I would love to hear from you, as well as feedback. So you can always find me at everydayinfertility@gmail.com via email, or you can find me on social media on Instagram at everydayinfertility. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate any time that you spend with me and sharing this with loved ones. I will see you guys next week. Thanks.